A chill ran down the police officer's spine as he stared at the online ad, unable to believe his eyes. It was Max, his loyal German shepherd, who had been missing for 3 weeks, now being sold for just $1 on a local classified site. This accidental discovery would transform his desperate search into a personal mission, challenging everything he knew about loyalty and justice. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. A heavy snow fell on the silent streets of Rocky Hollow that winter morning. White flakes piled up on rooftops and covered the sidewalks like a soft carpet. João Silva closed the door of his modest cabin, adjusting the scarf around his neck as he surveyed the frozen landscape. The police officer had recently transferred from Porto Alegre, seeking refuge from painful memories in the isolation of this small town. His footsteps left deep imprints in the fresh snow as he walked toward the town center. Joao's brown eyes carried the weight of losses no one here knew about. The partner killed in the line of duty, the sleepless nights replaying the explosion, the guilt that consumed him from within. Moving to this remote town was his attempt to start over, though he knew some ghosts would always follow. The winter fair was underway in the central square, an event that brought the residents together around colorful stalls. The sweet aroma of roasted pine nuts mingled with the steam rising from mugs of hot chocolate and mulled wine. For a moment, João allowed himself to be just another face in the crowd, watching families laugh and children play in the snow. It was a temporary relief from his solitude. As he walked among the stalls, the officer studied the unfamiliar faces, trying to get used to the idea of belonging here. That's when his eyes caught an image that made his heart freeze colder than the weather itself. At a makeshift stall on the edge of the fair, a gruff man displayed various used items, and chained to a rusty link was a thin, dejected German shepherd. João stopped, his breath catching in his throat. The dog's coat was dull, his ribs visible beneath the skin, and his eyes had lost their light. But it was his right ear, folded in a distinctive way from an old police operation, that confirmed the impossible. It was Thor, his former K-9 partner, the same dog who had been declared dead 3 years earlier, after the explosion that had also taken Ricardo Mendes. The world around him faded away. The murmur of the fair, the laughter of children, the cold wind, it all became a distant blur. João felt his legs weaken as he stared into the canine eyes he had once known so well. How could Thor be here? How had he survived? And why had he ended up in this deplorable state, chained up at a winter fair, miles away from where it had all happened? The officer took a step forward, and the dog lifted its head slightly, as if a fragment of recognition had pierced through years of suffering. João Silva's heart nearly leaped from his chest as his eyes met the German shepherd's. There was no doubt. It was Thor, his faithful patrol partner for years, pronounced dead after the incident that had also claimed his human partner. Memories flooded his mind. Long nights on surveillance in the patrol car, pursuits in the pouring rain, and those moments of peace when they both rested after a long day's work. The man behind the makeshift stall was Oswaldo Costa, a rough-looking individual with a suspicious gaze. He wore a tattered coat and held a detached expression as he gripped the rusty chain binding the animal. $1 for the dog, Oswaldo said, as if announcing the price of a worthless object. Doesn't eat much, but he barks too much for my taste. João looked at his former K-9 partner. Thor was thin, his coat lusterless, and a recent scar marked his front paw. His eyes, however, still held the intelligence that had always defined him. A wave of rage swelled inside the officer. How had Thor ended up like this? Who had abandoned him after everything he had done for the force? "I'll take him," João said, his voice thick with restrained emotion. With trembling fingers, the officer pulled a single coin from his pocket. $1. The absurd price for an animal that had saved lives, including his own. Oswaldo snatched the money with a swift movement and handed over the chain without ceremony. "He's yours," he muttered. "No returns," already turning to arrange other items on his stall. When João knelt to unfasten the chain, Thor remained still, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. The officer spoke softly, using the same tone he had used during training years ago. "It's me, partner. I'm here." The dog tilted his head slightly, a familiar gesture that brought tears to João's eyes. Slowly, Thor moved closer, sniffing the man's outstretched hand. There was a moment of recognition, a flicker in the animal's eyes that said everything. He knew who João was. As they walked away from the fair, the officer realized that this improbable meeting changed everything. What had begun as an attempt to forget his own pain had now become something greater. It wasn't just Thor who needed rescuing, it was him, too. The search for distraction in Rocky Hollow had just turned into a mission of redemption. The cold wind bit at their faces as they left the fair behind. Man and dog, two survivors reunited by fate in a town where secrets lay buried beneath the snow. The path back to the cabin felt endless. Thor dragged himself through the snow, each paw print a visible effort against years of neglect. João Silva watched the German shepherd with a lump in his throat. The animal that had once leaped over obstacles and pursued suspects could now barely keep a slow walking pace. The prominent ribs under his dull fur told a story of abandonment that the officer couldn't bear. "Easy, boy," João murmured, slowing his pace to match the dog's. Guilt burned inside him like acid. How could he have so easily accepted the official story of Thor's death? How many nights had he spent in mourning, drinking to forget, while his partner was alive, suffering somewhere? When they reached the modest cabin on the outskirts of Rocky Hollow, the animal hesitated at the entrance. João opened the door and waited patiently. Thor sniffed the air, perhaps recognizing a familiar scent in a space he had never known. Finally, with cautious steps, he went inside. The officer prepared a makeshift bed with old blankets near the fireplace. He lit the fire with trembling hands, watching the flames grow as Thor settled down, still wary, in the spreading warmth. The scent of pine from the firewood filled the room, creating an atmosphere that, on any other occasion, would have felt welcoming. João walked to a wooden box stored in the corner of the room. His fingers found what he was looking for, a worn identification collar with the metal tag still legible. Thor, K-9, Porto Alegre Police. He had kept it as a memento after the dog's supposed death. Sitting on the floor beside the dog, the man placed the collar on the coffee table. Thor raised his head, his tired eyes fixing on the object. A silent acknowledgement passed between them. "Forgive me," João whispered, tears streaming freely down his weathered face. "I should have looked harder." The silence of the cabin was broken only by the crackling of the fire and the animal's heavy breathing. Unanswered questions hung in the air like ghosts. How had Thor survived? Who had sold him to Oswaldo Costa? Why would someone fake the death of a police dog? As if sensing the man's anguish, the German shepherd dragged himself closer and rested his head on João's knee. A simple gesture that said everything. There was no blame in those weary eyes, only the relief of reunion. They both knew without a word that this night was just the beginning. The reunion was not the end of a story, but the start of another, one that would require courage to unravel. The next morning brought a timid light that filtered through the cracks of the cabin. João Silva woke to the comforting weight of Thor lying at his feet, a habit the animal seemed not to have forgotten. As he prepared a simple coffee, he heard a knock on the wooden door. Suspicious, as was his habit since his days in Porto Alegre, he approached cautiously. When he opened it, he was met by a woman with a gentle smile and a warm gaze. It was Ana Oliveira, a teacher at the local school, holding a colorful hand-knit blanket and a still warm apple pie, its sweet aroma instantly filling the air. "Good morning," she said, extending the gifts. "I hope I'm not disturbing you so early. I'm Anna, from the municipal school. Rocky Hollow is too small for secrets. Everyone already knows about you and the dog." Thor approached curiously, sniffing the air and studying the visitor with attentive eyes. The officer, unaccustomed to spontaneous acts of kindness, just mumbled a restrained thank you. His tense shoulders and downcast eyes betrayed his discomfort with the unexpected visit. "I thought you might need something," the teacher continued, discreetly observing the cabin's modest interior. "The winters here can be unforgiving for those who aren't prepared." Anna noticed the emotional scars João carried. They were there, visible in the corners of his eyes, in the stiffness of his gestures, in the way he avoided prolonged eye contact. It was the same expression she saw daily in children marked by silent traumas, a familiar pain she had learned to recognize in her years of teaching. "Thank you," he finally replied, accepting the gifts with slightly trembling hands. "You didn't have to bother." The woman just smiled, not forcing conversation or explanations. There was something in the way Thor approached her, sniffing her hands cautiously, that seemed like a sign of approval. The animal, normally wary, showed an acceptance that surprised his owner. "If you need anything, I'm at the school during the day," Anna offered, already backing away. "Or at the yellow house near the square." As the teacher left, João remained at the door for a few moments, watching her silhouette disappear among the snow-covered pines. The blanket in his hands and the aroma of the apple pie brought a forgotten feeling of comfort. In that moment, without him realizing it, a small seed of trust had been planted. Something that, like the resilient trees of this region, would take time to grow but would have deep roots when it finally bloomed. Ana Oliveira walked through her classroom with a watchful eye as her students drew freely. The art therapy exercise she had implemented in recent weeks revealed more than just colors and shapes. It revealed the fears and secrets the children carried. Leafing through the drawings, the teacher felt a chill as she noticed a disturbing pattern. Several students depicted black trucks, warehouses with dark windows, and most alarmingly, dogs trapped in tiny cages. "What are these drawings, children?" she asked, keeping her voice calm despite her growing unease. That's when Daniel Santos, a boy with observant eyes and hands that always trembled, approached her shyly. The boy held out a piece of paper on which he had drawn, in impressive detail, a winding trail that connected an abandoned warehouse to the schoolyard. "They come this way at night, teacher," Daniel whispered, looking nervously at the door. "The bad men with the sad dogs." Anna held the drawing firmly, feeling the weight of responsibility. The children were trying to tell her something that the adults of Rocky Hollow insisted on ignoring. She carefully placed the sheet in her folder, promising herself she wouldn't let this go. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Thor walked with cautious steps through the old train yard. The German shepherd, still thin but with a renewed light in his eyes, seemed to be following an invisible map etched in his memory. João Silva watched his K-9 companion with growing curiosity. The officer had brought Thor for a walk, but the animal clearly had other plans. Suddenly, the dog stopped in front of a rusty door almost hidden by overgrown vegetation. His ears perked up in alert, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. Thor began to scratch at the entrance with determination, looking back at João as if begging him to understand. "What did you find, boy?" the officer murmured, approaching cautiously. As he touched the oxidized doorknob, João felt a familiar shiver run down his spine. The feeling every investigator recognizes when they are about to uncover something important. His old police instincts, dormant since his transfer to Rocky Hollow, roared back to life. "Let's find out what's going on here," he said, briefly stroking Thor's head. Man and dog exchanged a look of mutual understanding. The bond between them, forged in years of working together and renewed by their unexpected reunion, was now transforming into something new. A partnership determined to uncover the secrets that the small town of Rocky Hollow tried so desperately to hide beneath its blanket of snow and silence. The sun was setting when João Silva and Thor reached the abandoned warehouse near the old train yard. The officer had noticed the German shepherd's restless behavior all day, as if the animal were trying to communicate something urgent. Following the dog's lead, João found a nearly imperceptible entrance between the rotten floorboards. "What have you found, boy?" he murmured, carefully prying away the damp wood. Thor let out a low bark, his snout pointing insistently toward the dark opening that had been revealed. With his phone's flashlight, the officer illuminated a makeshift ladder descending into what appeared to be a secret cellar. The scent of damp earth and decaying paper filled his nostrils as they went down. The subterranean space was larger than it seemed, with moist concrete walls and makeshift shelves. João's heart hammered against his ribs when he saw what lay before him. Boxes, neatly arranged by date, containing documents, unregistered weapons, and photographs of clandestine meetings. "My God," he whispered, his trembling hands flipping through the papers. He immediately recognized the face of Carlos Costa in several photos, always flanked by men in suits, some of whom João knew from his old precinct in Porto Alegre. There were ledgers detailing transactions, codes, and locations, all of which corresponded to failed operations from the past few years. Thor remained on high alert, sniffing every corner of the hideout as his owner delved deeper into the evidence. In a red folder, João found what made his blood run cold: detailed reports on the explosion that had claimed the life of his former partner, Ricardo Mendes. The incident, which everyone had believed to be a tragic accident, was documented here as a planned operation. "They knew. They planned the whole thing," he murmured to himself, feeling the crushing weight of betrayal. One photo showed Ricardo days before the explosion, being tailed by men linked to the ex-sheriff. Another revealed the kickback scheme his partner had been about to expose. Thor drew near, resting his snout on the officer's hand, as if sensing his pain. João stroked the dog's head, trying to rein in the rage swelling inside him. "We're taking this to Laura," he decided, referring to the new chief. "But we have to be careful." As he tucked selected documents into his backpack, João realized he had found much more than proof of corruption. He had discovered the truth about his past, and now, with Thor by his side, he was determined to see justice done, even if it meant confronting the entire power structure of Rocky Hollow. An unexpected blizzard lashed Rocky Hollow that week, transforming the streets into silent, white corridors. The bitter cold forced the schools to close, but Ana Oliveira couldn't rest. Daniel Santos, the boy with the revealing drawings, hadn't returned home after the last bell. The hours ticked by, and desperation grew among the parents and teachers gathered at the school. When João Silva heard about the disappearance, he felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same fear he'd felt when he lost Thor years ago. Now, ironically, it was the newly rescued dog who might be able to help. Though still frail, Thor became alert when João presented him with a coat the boy had left behind in the classroom. "We're going to find him, partner," the officer murmured, watching the German shepherd sniff with determination, despite the biting wind that carried ever denser flurries of snow. While search parties scoured the town center, Thor pulled João toward the old train yard. The dog followed a trail invisible to human eyes, pushing through snowdrifts with difficulty but without hesitation. His one folded ear stood out against the white landscape like a banner of hope. As they neared an abandoned warehouse, Thor began to bark insistently. João followed the sound to a small, makeshift structure out back, almost completely buried in snow. Shoving aside planks and debris, they found Daniel huddled in a corner, shivering from the cold, but alive. Thor immediately lay down beside the boy, sharing his body heat. "I got lost on my way home from school," Daniel whispered through blue-tinged lips. "Thor found me and wouldn't leave my cell." João wrapped the boy in his own coat, marveling at the scene. The dog he had rescued for $1 was now saving another life, creating a chain of protection that defied his own abandonment. As he carried Daniel back toward town, with Thor trotting faithfully at his heels, the officer felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: genuine hope. Anna wept when she saw the three of them arriving at the school. She gave the boy a fierce maternal hug, then pulled João and Thor into the same grateful embrace. In that moment, the officer understood that perhaps there was redemption for a broken heart like his, not in forgetting, but in the courage to keep protecting, even after so much loss. "Thank you," Anna whispered, looking directly into João's eyes. "You two are true heroes." Thor just wagged his tail, as if this was simply what he had always done: find the lost. News of Daniel Santos's rescue spread through Rocky Hollow like wildfire. The next morning, a small crowd gathered in the town square, where the snow formed a pure white carpet. Thor, still gaunt, but with a renewed light in his eyes, was met with applause and gentle pats. Children approached timidly to touch the German shepherd's fur, while João Silva watched with a mix of pride and apprehension. "He's always known how to find those who need finding," the officer remarked as the dog accepted treats from grateful residents. But while the celebration unfolded in public, a different kind of storm was brewing behind the scenes. João found an anonymous note tucked under his car's windshield wiper. "Dogs that sniff too much end up buried in the snow." The handwriting was firm, that of someone accustomed to giving orders. That same afternoon, Carlos Costa made a coincidental appearance at the local market while João was shopping. The ex-sheriff, a man with broad shoulders and an intimidating gaze, feigned cordiality as he whispered through clenched teeth, "You're not from around here, Silva. You don't understand how things work in Rocky Hollow." Thor, waiting outside, began to bark furiously as he caught the ex-sheriff's scent, confirming João's suspicions about the source of the threats. Ana Oliveira noticed the change in the officer's demeanor during her visit that evening. As she served hot chocolate by the fireplace, the teacher saw him constantly checking the windows and keeping Thor close. "You're not the first to poke at the town's wounds," Ana revealed, wrapping herself in a blanket against the chill. 3 years ago, Mariana Campos, a new teacher like me, started noticing the same signs in the children. Strange drawings, unexplainable fears, stories about the black trucks. João leaned forward, his eyes fixed on her. What happened to her? Officially, she requested a transfer for personal reasons. In truth, she was intimidated until she gave up. Her apartment was broken into. She got phone calls in the middle of the night. The entire school pretended nothing was happening. Anna took Joao's hand, her grip firm. The silence here isn't just fear, you see? It's tradition. Generations have learned to look the other way. Thor came closer, resting his head on the officer's lap. The warmth from the fire couldn't chase away the chill Joao felt as he grasped the scale of what he was facing. It wasn't just Carlos Costa and his cronies. It was an entire culture of complicity he would have to dismantle. The afternoon was particularly cold when João Silva took Thor to visit the school where Ana Oliveira taught. The officer wanted the German shepherd to become familiar with the places Daniel frequented, creating a protective network for the boy who had already endured so much. As they walked across the schoolyard, something unexpected happened. Thor, usually calm and composed, began to snarl viciously at the scent of Marcos, one of the janitors, who was passing by with bags of trash. João restrained the dog with difficulty as Anna apologized for his behavior. I've never seen Thor react like this without a reason, João remarked, puzzled. The janitor just shrugged and hurried away, but the officer noticed the cold sweat beading on the man's forehead, despite the freezing air. 3 days later, during a visit to Joao's cabin, Daniel handed him a drawing made with colored pencils. The boy, ever observant, had captured on paper something the adults had missed. It showed a trail leading from the back of the school, winding behind the cafeteria, and ending at the very same abandoned warehouse where Joao had found the incriminating documents. The men in the black trucks use this path when no one is looking, Daniel explained in a low voice, his eyes on the floor. Marcos always cleans up after they leave. Thor, lying near the fire, perked up his ears at the mention of the janitor's name. Joao and Anna exchanged a worried glance. The drawing depicted not only the route, but also small figures that looked like children being led down the path. That night, as snow fell silently over Rocky Hollow, Joao reviewed all the evidence he had gathered. The documents from the warehouse, Thor's reactions, the children's drawings. It was all beginning to form a picture far darker than he had initially imagined. This isn't just about dogs or drugs, Joao said to Anna, who held a teacup in her trembling hands. It's a scheme that involves children, too. The teacher nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I always suspected. Some children disappear for days and come back. Different. Quieter. The whole town pretends not to see. Thor moved closer, placing his head on Joao's lap. The officer stroked the dog's fur, thinking of how the community had built a wall of silence around unforgivable crimes. Now, with each new discovery, it became clear that the $1 price he'd paid for Thor was just the tip of an iceberg of exploitation, one that ran deep into the heart of Rocky Hollow. João Silva returned to the abandoned warehouse at dawn, Thor sniffing every corner of the grim place. The officer knew he had to find more proof before his investigation was discovered. As he sifted through debris and dusty boxes, his fingers brushed against something soft, a work glove, partially buried under old papers. Examining it, João noticed stains of a white chemical powder covering the palm. He instinctively brought it to his nose and recoiled, the memory hitting him like a physical blow. It was the same odor that had permeated the scene of the explosion that killed Ricardo Mendes, his former partner, 3 years ago. An acrid, unmistakable scent that had been seared into his memory like a scar. This can't be a coincidence, he murmured to Thor, who watched him intently. The dog tilted his head, as if he too recognized that smell from the past they shared. João sealed the glove in a plastic bag, his heart racing. The connection between Rocky Hollow and the tragedy that had made him flee Porto Alegre was becoming terrifyingly clear. The past and present were intertwining, as if everything was part of a larger design he was only now beginning to understand. The following afternoon, at the local school, Ana Oliveira invited João for a private conversation in her classroom. Daniel Santos was there, sitting in a chair too small for him, his feet dangling above the floor. "He wants to tell you something important," the teacher explained, her expression a mix of concern and hope. The boy, once so withdrawn, now spoke with surprising clarity. He described the nights he would wake to noises from the schoolyard. How, hiding behind his bedroom curtain, he saw Carlos Costa shouting orders at men unloading heavy crates from black trucks. "He gets really mad when things don't go his way," Daniel explained, unconsciously mimicking the ex-sheriff's authoritarian stance. "One time, he said he'd make everyone blow up if anyone talked." A chill ran down Joao's spine. The boy's words confirmed his darkest suspicions. Anna gently took Daniel's hand, pride in the small boy's courage written all over her face. "I'm going to protect you both," Joao promised, determination rising in his chest like a flame, no matter who is involved. That night, as Thor slept at the foot of his bed, the officer made a silent vow. He would see this through to the end. For Ricardo, for Thor, for Daniel, for all of Rocky Hollow, whatever the cost. João Silva began to notice the subtle signs. The same car parked at different points on his route home. Fresh footprints in the snow around his cabin. Silent phone calls that disconnected the moment he answered. It wasn't paranoia. His years on the force had taught him to recognize when he was being watched. One particularly frigid afternoon, Ana Oliveira showed up at his door with a steaming casserole and a worried look. "The kids have been talking about strange men hanging around the school," she said, as Thor sniffed her hands with familiarity. The teacher had become a constant presence in the officer's solitary life, bringing not just food, but news and a companionship he hadn't known he needed. "You shouldn't get involved in this," João muttered, serving her a plate. "People who get close to me tend to get hurt." Anna just smiled, watching as Thor strategically positioned himself between the door and his owner. "Too late," she replied, gesturing to Daniel's drawings, which he had hung on his kitchen wall. "We're all involved now." On the coldest nights, Thor refused to sleep, remaining alert, his ears pricked at the slightest sound. The German shepherd, though still regaining his weight, had resumed his protective instincts. When the wind rattled the windows, the dog would let out a low whine, as if remembering his days of abandonment, before quickly returning to his post as sentinel. One morning, João found a note tucked under his car's windshield wiper. "Haven't you learned anything from the explosion?" The handwriting was familiar, the same as on the reports Carlos Costa used to sign when he was still sheriff. The officer crumpled the note in his pocket. But Thor sensed the change in his breathing and didn't leave his heels for the rest of the day. Anna began bringing books with his meals. "To pass the time," she would explain, but João knew it was her way of saying she wouldn't let him face this alone. Small gestures, a cup of hot coffee left on the table, a new scarf for the colder days, a hand that occasionally touched his shoulder. Were building a bridge across the abyss of mistrust that separated him from the world. At night, when the nightmares woke him. João found comfort in the warmth of Thor lying at the foot of the bed and in the lights from Anna's house, visible through his window. The bond between man and dog, forged in missions and survival, was now expanding to include others. It was this connection, stronger than any threat, that held them steady as the storm gathered. With a folder full of documents under his arm, João Silva knocked on the door of the municipal police station. His breath formed small clouds in the cold morning air. Inside, Chief Laura Martins greeted him with a look that mixed curiosity with determination. At 32, Laura had arrived in Rocky Hollow with a mission: to clean up the local police force's reputation, tarnished by Carlos Costa's years in command. "This is more serious than we imagined," João said, spreading photographs, reports, and the glove with chemical residue across her desk. "These documents connect the ex-sheriff directly to the explosion that killed my partner 3 years ago." The chief examined each paper with meticulous attention. Her eyes widened as she recognized the names of prominent figures in the city. "We'll need a coordinated operation," she concluded, running a hand through her hair. "If we move too hastily, they'll destroy evidence and silence witnesses." While the two officers mapped out a strategy, at the local school, Daniel Santos was focused on his sketchbook. The boy, who once barely spoke in class, was now producing detailed maps of the hideouts he had discovered during his years of silently observing the town's suspicious movements. "This is where the trucks stop at night," he explained to Ana Oliveira, pointing to a specific spot behind the abandoned warehouse. "And this secret passage leads to the basement of the old town hall." The teacher stared in awe at the precision of the drawings. The children always knew, she thought. While the adults pretended not to see, their little eyes recorded everything. Anna gathered the drawings from Daniel and other students, turning them into the foundation of the Secret Guardian Project, an initiative that taught children how to identify dangerous situations and trust safe adults. "We can't just arrest a few people," João said to the chief as they planned the operation. "We need to dismantle the entire network." Laura agreed, marking strategic points on the town map. "We're going to need outside support. This town is afraid to confront its own past." That night, as Thor rested at the foot of his bed, João looked out the cabin window toward the distant lights of Rocky Hollow. The town he had chosen to escape his past was now forcing him to face it. The next day would begin an operation that could cost him everything, or finally bring justice to the memories that haunted him. The pre-dawn chill fell over Rocky Hollow like an icy shroud. João Silva was sleeping restlessly when Thor began to bark furiously. The dog raced to the back door, sniffing the air with intensity. Still drowsy, the officer followed the animal into the yard, where he noticed a familiar chemical scent lingering in the air. Thor lunged toward a bush, his fur bristling as he growled. That's when João saw it. The metallic glint of a makeshift device hidden beneath the leaves. His heart hammered in his chest as he recognized a detonator similar to the one that had taken Ricardo's life years ago. "Stay back!" a voice shouted from the shadows. A hooded man emerged, brandishing a gun. João immediately recognized him as one of Carlos Costa's accomplices from the old operation, the one that had led to the explosion that was supposed to have killed Thor. Without hesitation, the German shepherd charged the aggressor, clamping down on his arm. The man fired, but the shot went wide. In the ensuing struggle, Thor managed to knock the intruder down, but was slashed in the flank with a knife. Even wounded, the dog kept the attacker pinned until João could subdue him. With the criminal tied up and the police on their way, the officer turned his attention to Thor, who was bleeding onto the snow. His hands trembled as he pressed a cloth against the animal's wound. "Hang on, partner," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. At the veterinary hospital, the doctor worked for hours to stabilize Thor. João remained in the waiting room, his face buried in his hands. He felt a soft touch on his shoulder and looked up to see Ana Oliveira, her eyes filled with concern. "I came as soon as I heard," the teacher said, sitting beside him. Wordlessly, João let her take his hand. The tears, held back for so long, finally came, not just for his injured dog, but for everything he had lost over the years. His partner, Ricardo, his trust in people, the years without Thor. Daniel arrived a short time later, brought by his mother. The boy handed João a colorful drawing. 4 figures, a man, a woman, a child, and a dog, sitting around a lit fireplace. In the corner, in a child's script, were the words, "Our family." When the veterinarian finally emerged with positive news about Thor's recovery, João felt something shift inside him. Looking at Anna and Daniel, he understood that the ambush wasn't just another chapter in the investigation. It was the beginning of a new story for all of them. The office at the Rocky Hollow police station was silent when Carlos Costa entered, handcuffed and defeated. João Silva watched through the glass, Thor sitting faithfully by his side. The ex-sheriff, once an imposing figure in the town, now seemed small beneath the weight of the accusations. Laura Martins conducted the interrogation with unwavering firmness. The evidence was irrefutable. Documents, photographs, and testimonies formed a web from which there was no escape. When confronted with Daniel's drawing, Carlos crumbled. "It was all for the money," the ex-sheriff confessed, his voice breaking. "We started with small schemes, but it soon grew into larger operations." When Ricardo started asking questions, João closed his eyes as he heard the confirmation of what he had long suspected. His former partner had not died in an accident. The explosion had been meticulously planned to silence Ricardo Mendez and any investigation into the trafficking ring that involved children and animals. "And Thor?" João asked, stepping into the room. "Why didn't you kill him too?" Carlos swallowed hard. "We thought he died in the blast. When we found out he survived, Oswaldo was supposed to get rid of him, but he was always too weak to kill a dog." The news spread like wildfire through the small town. In the central square, residents gathered in heated groups. Some argued the past should stay buried, that exposing the crimes would only tarnish Rocky Hollow's reputation. But others, inspired by the courage of the officer and the teacher, demanded that justice be served in full. Ana Oliveira organized a vigil at the school. Children and parents lit candles in memory of the victims silenced over the years. Daniel was there, holding a poster with drawings of Thor and João depicted as heroes. "We can no longer pretend we don't see," the teacher told the crowd. "Our children deserve to grow up in a place where the truth matters." The next morning, a line formed at the police station. Ordinary people, shopkeepers, elderly residents, all wanted to share stories they had kept hidden for years. The silence that had suffocated Rocky Hollow for so long was beginning to break. João returned home exhausted, but with a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. As he opened the door, he found Thor lying on the rug, ever vigilant. The officer knelt and hugged the animal. "We did it, partner," he whispered. "Ricardo would be proud." For the first time since arriving in this snow-covered town, João Silva felt he had found his place. The truth, as painful as it was finally beginning to heal old wounds. The Rocky Hollow Community Hall had never been so full. Residents squeezed between the wooden benches, while João Silva stood beside Thor, who seemed stronger and healthier with each passing day. Chief Laura Martins conducted the assembly with authority, presenting the evidence collected against the former police administration. "We can no longer pretend that nothing happened," Laura declared, projecting photos and documents found in the abandoned warehouse. "This town deserves a fresh start." The vote was nearly unanimous. All officers connected to ex-sheriff Carlos Costa were dismissed, including 3 investigators and 2 municipal guards. The silence that had long choked Rocky Hollow began to dissipate like the morning mist over the pine forests. Ana Oliveira, sitting in the front row with Daniel Santos beside her, smiled as the mayor took the stage carrying a small velvet box. The boy, once so quiet, could now barely contain his excitement. "In recognition of the courage and loyalty demonstrated," the mayor announced, "we award Thor the title of official hero of Rocky Hollow." As the German Shepherd received the gold medal around his neck, João couldn't hold back his tears. Just a few months ago, he believed he had lost everything: his K-9 partner, his faith in justice, his ability to trust. Now, with Thor at his side, he felt that perhaps there was a greater purpose in his return to this small town. The following week, the old warehouse that had harbored so many dark secrets was demolished. Residents gathered to watch the walls crumble, as if each falling brick carried away a piece of the past they all wanted to forget. Daniel, holding Anna's hand, watched with attentive eyes, mentally sketching every moment. In place of the ruins, the city council approved the construction of a community center. The project, conceived by the teacher, would include a library, rooms for art activities, and a memorial dedicated to the victims of the corruption that had haunted the town for so long. "We'll call it the Ricardo Mendes Community Center," João suggested during the groundbreaking ceremony, honoring his former human partner. Thor, lying at the officer's feet, seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. The dog, once sold for $1, now wore not just a medal, but the symbol of a town finally finding the courage to face its own demons and rebuild on a foundation of truth and justice. The Rocky Hollow School was transformed. The gray walls gave way to colorful murals painted by the students themselves. In the main hallway, a new emotional support wing opened its doors, created with help from the entire community. Here, the children's drawings were no longer ignored, but valued as important warning signs and genuine expressions of courage. Ana Oliveira coordinated this space with the dedication she had always shown her students. The teacher, once seen merely as a kind, solitary figure, was now recognized as a leading voice in compassionate care. Her techniques for active listening and interpreting children's art drew educators from neighboring towns, who came to learn how to identify signs of abuse and trauma through creativity. Daniel Santos, in turn, became a living symbol of resilience. The boy who once barely spoke now helped other children express their fears through drawing. "You can draw what you can't say," he would explain with a wisdom that belied his years. His story inspired not only the children, but also the adults who had grown accustomed to the imposed silence. At João Silva's cabin, the changes were just as profound. The fireplace, which had once illuminated only lonely nights, now warmed a makeshift family. The officer still carried his scars, both visible and invisible, but he had learned to share their weight. Thor, ever watchful, would lie at his master's feet, while Anna and Daniel completed the circle around the fire. On special evenings, the group would gather to tell stories. João would recount adventures from when Thor was a young police dog, while Anna shared local legends she had learned from the town's elders. Daniel, his sketchbook always in hand, illustrated each tale, creating a scrapbook of their shared memories. "I never thought this house could hold so much life," the officer confessed one night, watching Thor play with Daniel on the rug. Anna squeezed his hand gently. "Sometimes, we have to lose everything to find what truly matters." The school and the cabin became 2 points of light in Rocky Hollow, radiating hope for a community learning to face its past. João, despite all his scars, finally felt part of something larger than his own pain. The solitude that had consumed him for so long was gradually giving way to a feeling he had almost forgotten: belonging. Winter finally gave way to spring in Rocky Hollow. The snow that had once blanketed the streets and rooftops slowly melted, revealing a town transformed not just by the change of season, but by the events of the past few months. The trees blossomed in shades of green and pink, and the sun, once shy, now gently warmed the residents who stepped outside to enjoy the first days of warmth. In João Silva's home, the fireplace was still lit on the colder nights. The scent of burning pine, once a lonely signature of his solitude, now mingled with the sweet perfume of flowers blooming in the school's renewed garden. Ana Oliveira, the town's teacher, had brought the space back to life with her students, creating a vibrant symbol of the renewal their entire community was experiencing. Thor, fully healed from the wounds of the ambush, now ran freely across the field behind the school. His coat shone healthy and bright in the afternoon sun, bearing no trace of the physical scars he had once carried. The German shepherd barked with joy as Daniel Santos, a boy reborn, threw a yellow ball as far as his young arms could manage. The child who had been so withdrawn and frightened now smiled openly, his eyes reflecting a confidence forged in the fires of trauma. In the shade of a flowering tree, João and Ana watched them, their hands intertwined. For João, the police officer who had arrived in Rocky Hollow haunted by ghosts, the crushing weight on his shoulders seemed to lighten with each passing day. The feeling of his fingers laced with Anna's offered a sense of security he never thought he would find again. "They look like they were made for each other," Anna remarked, her voice soft as she watched Thor stand guard over little Daniel. João gently squeezed her hand. "So were we," he replied, his own voice now free of the harsh edge it once held. This makeshift family, bound by ties far stronger than blood, grew with every dawn. The nightmares that had plagued João's sleep grew rarer, replaced by dreams of a future that finally seemed within reach. His phone, once a tool for work alone, now held a gallery of simple moments. Thor sleeping by the fire, Daniel drawing at the kitchen table, Anna smiling amongst her flowers. Spring in Rocky Hollow was more than a change of season. It was living proof that from the deepest pain, the most resilient bonds could grow. Yet, even with peace restored, João Silva knew the past would never be completely erased. The scars ran too deep. On the coldest nights, when the wind howled against the cabin windows, he would still wake with a jolt, his heart pounding and his skin slick with sweat. Fragments of the past would invade his dreams. The explosion that had taken his partner, Ricardo. The vacant look in Thor's eyes when he'd found him at that winter market. The incriminating documents in the abandoned warehouse. In those moments of darkness, the officer would reach for the nightstand, where Thor's old collar lay. The cold, rough touch of the metal tag was an anchor, pulling him back to the present. Sometimes the dog himself would sense his owner's distress, leaping onto the bed to offer the warm, solid comfort of his presence. "You always know when I need you, don't you, boy?" João would murmur, stroking the dog's soft ears. In the morning, the last of the shadows would vanish with Ana Oliveira's smile. She had become a constant, gentle presence in his life, bringing a lightness to a world that had only known weight. It was a transformation that echoed throughout the town. At school, Daniel Santos was thriving. The boy who once barely spoke now led meetings for the Secret Guardian Project, teaching other children to give voice to their fears and hopes through art. His courage inspired even the shyest to speak up. The project had expanded beyond the school walls, becoming a symbol of hope for the entire community. Families gathered for weekly meetings at the newly built community center, its walls decorated with the children's vibrant drawings. One evening, walking home beneath a sky littered with stars, with Thor trotting faithfully ahead, João realized that despite the scars, he had found something he thought was lost forever: a place to belong. He had paid a high price for every victory. He had dismantled a corrupt network, but in doing so he had exposed a collective wound that Rocky Hollow had tried to bury beneath snow and silence. The most difficult battle, however, had been against himself. For years, João had cultivated isolation as a shield. Letting Ana and Daniel in meant tearing down those walls, brick by brick, and making himself vulnerable to loss once more. One night, watching Ana doze on the sofa while Daniel played with Thor on a colorful blanket, he felt a familiar knot in his throat. There was something terrifying, and yet profoundly comforting, in having people to worry about again. "You think they'll stay?" he asked the German shepherd in a low voice. Thor rested his chin on Joao's knee. His brown eyes, once dull with pain, now reflecting the warm light of the fireplace with a wisdom only animals possess. Just then, Anna's eyes fluttered open. She smiled, a sleepy, knowing smile. "We're all broken in some way," she murmured, reaching out to touch his hand. "But together, the pieces fit better." In that moment, João understood. Thor hadn't just returned to his life. The dog had rescued more than memories. He had brought redemption for a broken officer, safety for a lost boy, and a voice for a silenced teacher. In his own inexplicable way, he had brought salvation to all of Rocky Hollow. Today, the town is transformed. On spring mornings, Thor, a hero's medal gleaming on his collar, chases squirrels in the central square, followed by the echoing laughter of children. From the window of the community center, where he now teaches safety courses to young people, João Silva watches the scene unfold. The school walls, once silent witnesses to fear, are now a gallery for the Secret Guardian Project. Daniel, now a confident teenager, leads support groups, telling visitors, "Drawing saved my life." The old code of silence has been replaced by shared stories around a communal bonfire. And Joao's cabin, once a lonely refuge, is now home to his found family. The scars remain, on Thor's body and in all of their hearts, but they no longer define them. On the living room wall, framed and preserved, is a single coin. The coin that bought not just a dog, but the redemption of an entire town. And whenever someone asks how it all began, João simply points to Thor and says with a serene smile, "He found his way back to me, and together we saved each other." And the German shepherd, as if understanding every word, lifts his graying head and looks at his human with a loyalty that transcends both time and pain. In Rocky Hollow, the snow still falls in winter, but it can no longer bury the truth.